What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy. So I'm finally continuing my reviews for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I've been very slow with this franchise overall, but there's a lot of installments and I've been having a lot of fun talking about them when I finally get around to finally doing it. And in today's video, I'm very happy to be joined by my buddy Ronnie from his channel News to Astonish. A big thanks to him for being here in this video, and you're going to hear from him in just a little bit, but as usual, the link to any of my guests are down below in the description box. Go give him some love, let him know I sent you. And for now, let's get into my thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy. One of the most unique installments and one of the newer installments into the franchise in terms of a set of characters that people really weren't familiar with. When I heard about this movie being made, I was stoked. And the reason for that is, unlike a lot of people who had never heard of Guardians, I actually had. And a big reason for that was because a friend of mine actually told me, hey, you should check out Guardians of the Galaxy. It's kind of like Star Wars in the Marvel Universe. And it pretty much is. And in a lot of ways, this movie is still my favorite film in the entire MCU. Now, it's hard to say that entirely when we've had things like the Avengers films or Captain America Civil War since then that have just taken what a comic book movie is to the next level and giving us some of the biggest, complete conclusions to these stories, as well as some absolutely fantastic fan moments that, as a longtime fan of Marvel, those fan service moments, being able to see what we've been able to see in this franchise since Guardians has come out. Yeah, I mean, it's just next level. And as a longtime comic book fan, there's so many fantastic installments into this franchise that are just absolutely phenomenal, that are just kind of just give you geekgasms, you know what I mean? But with this film, in terms of like singular franchises within the MCU, I think that this movie just nails it. I think this is an awesome installment into the MCU that can really be its own thing. This movie in a lot of ways has so many connections to the MCU, but in a lot of ways also could just easily be its own thing. I love the cast, I love the direction, I love the soundtrack, the score, the special effects, the costume design, the set design. And overall, this is just one of my favorite films in the entirety of the MCU. And like I said earlier, arguably my favorite singular film from any of the individual franchises that are under the Marvel banner. And there's definitely some installments that are top notch, but there's just something about this film that I really, really love. You have fantastic characters, you have a really great story that develops these characters, and by the end of the film, you feel like a lot of these moments with these characters, or pretty much all of them, are very earned. Now, like with any movie, there's definitely elements that don't work 100%, but ultimately, I have a lot of fun with this movie, and like I said earlier, it pretty much is Star Wars in the MCU. And for anybody who's familiar with my channel, I'm wearing a Star Wars shirt right now, got a lot of Star Wars stuff behind me, got a little Obi-Wan back here behind me, and quite frankly, I just love Star Wars. You guys already know that. So for me, Star Wars in the MCU, sign me up. So what is this movie all about? Well, like I said, it's directed by James Gunn, stars people like Chris Pratt, Zoe Saldana, Dave Bautista, Bradley Cooper, and Vin Diesel, as well as many others, and tells the story of this ragtag group of individuals who end up getting together and going on this huge adventure to stop this guy named Ronan the Accuser, who's out there trying to kind of do Thanos' bidding in order to destroy worlds and get their hands on an Infinity Stone. And man, this movie is just jam-packed with a great soundtrack, like I said, great score, the visuals and everything that goes into the production of this film is just top-notch. And ultimately, the best part about it really are the characters and their story. You really feel for everybody that you're really attached to in this film, because the film actually gives you stuff to attach to when it comes to these characters. It's also very light and funny, while also having its toes dipped in some pretty serious storytelling. There are so many phenomenal, great characters in this film that have great makeup work on them, great prosthetic work on them, and are just very memorable characters. The film focuses on the character of Peter Quill, who's played by Chris Pratt in this film, and when we first meet him, he's being abducted by some sort of alien craft as his mother has just died after her battle to cancer. We later see him much grown up, part of a group of bounty hunters, and after getting put into prison, he ends up running into Rocket Raccoon, played by Bradley Cooper, Groot, played by Vin Diesel, and it still blows me away that they pay Vin Diesel money for him to just say 3 words. Absolutely hilarious to me. Then you have Dave Bautista playing the character of Drax the Destroyer, and then you have Zoe Saldana as Gamora, the daughter of Thanos, who would obviously go on to become the biggest nemesis for the Avengers in that whole first saga, the Infinity Saga, which is just so crazy that it's come and gone at this point, and I'm really excited for what we have moving forward. So ultimately, that's the basic gist of the story, and it's just such a good time. This movie does such a great job of being a big sci-fi, over-the-top fantasy film, while also just being a comedy in a lot of ways, being a great action movie, and a great character movie that really hones in on these characters that you would go on to love for more films after this. Now that I've given my initial thoughts on this movie, let's go ahead and hear what Ronnie from News to Astonish had to say about this.
Hey everyone, Thank you so much for tuning in to Anthony's channel. And Anthony, thank you so much for having me a part of this review. I'm really excited to talk about Guardians of the Galaxy. And this movie was a total surprise for me when I first saw this movie in theaters. Now, going in, I had no idea that there was even such thing as a Guardians of the Galaxy and why it was coming into the MCU. Totally something different from what we've gotten before, which was like the Iron Man movies, Thor, the Incredible Hulk, the Avengers, and so on and so forth. This isn't just a character origin story. It's actually multiple characters, and it's a ragtag team of, like, you know, a group of misfits basically out into space going on an adventure. Now, this is something that we get to explore for the very first time throughout the MCU movies, and that's outer space, of course. But mainly the story really does follow Peter Quill, who's the main protagonist out of the whole bunch of misfits. And basically, we find that he basically gets abducted from Earth, or as the Guardians like to call it, or other characters in the series like to call it, Terran, you know, because Peter Quill is of Terran origin. So he gets abducted by Yondu and his group of, you know, Ravagers, and gets taken. And basically he becomes a bounty hunter, and he just goes after bounties to collect his dough and move on to the next bounty. That's really all he does. And I'm like, you know what? I can really get behind this. This sounds like a lot of fun. And another thing about this series that reminds me of another certain ragtag team of misfits who collect bounties is pretty much Cowboy Bebop, but set in the Marvel Universe. There are some striking similarities, honestly. And also, I didn't know anything about the comics of Guardians of the Galaxy before going into this film. However, there was a bit of exploration about these characters and where they came from in the comics and who they were. And come to find out that they're actually quite different from their comic book counterpart. You know, Peter Quill, besides having the same exact name in common from the comics and the movies, had a completely different origin story, which I'm not really going to get into. In fact, I'll let you guys go ahead and, you know, explore that story for yourself. But there are some minor similarities nonetheless. But aside from that, it really does focus on the character of Peter Quill, and of course, it does focus a little bit on, you know, Gamora, which is the female, like the femme fatale of, you know, of space, the most dangerous woman in the galaxies and the cosmos. And then there's Rocket Raccoon, who's my favorite member of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and there's Groot and Drax. And, you know, all these people, you know, all these characters in this ragtag team of, you know, misfits, you know, have interesting backstories. They're really just losers, and all they really have is each other. And what I really like about this film is the camaraderie that comes with this group of people. And that is family, because that's all they have, you know. It really does send a good message. And aside from, like, this movie being a good time by implementing things like, you know, classic music from like the 80s and 90s and whatnot, and, you know, the 70s, and of course, besides that, there's that message of family in this group of misfits. And I know I keep saying misfits, but that's what they really are. They're just misfits. And overall, the main story is basically Peter Quill. He went over after this orb that he had to collect. It gets taken from him by Gamora, and then Gamora gets subdued, and then all these people get subdued, and they get taken to a jail, and then they have to work together to bust out of this jail. And come to find out, at the very end of this movie, we have a character who's known by Ronan the Accuser, the antagonist of the movie. He's going after this orb because inside it, there's an Infinity Stone, and it is known as the Power Stone. And its origins and everything else about it is explained throughout the movie. There is a bit of exposition that kind of like looked a little silly, but it was necessary because a lot of people at the time who were not familiar with the Infinity Saga, which is what these MCU movies have been up until Avengers Endgame, it's known as the Infinity Saga. And these Infinity Stones have kind of been like the MacGuffins throughout the films. It's not in every film, but for the most part, they appear in a lot of these movies that we've gotten up until, you know, Avengers Endgame, of course. We come to find out that there's a bigger power in this orb, and Ronan has been seeking it for the longest. And also there's some evil behind the scenes going on where Ronan was actually originally sent to claim this orb, or the Infinity Stone, for Thanos, who would become later like the main antagonist of the MCU. And that's like the big bad. But overall, I mean, I'm going to give my thoughts about this movie. It's a fun time. I think the music, looking at it now retrospectively, was kind of used a bit of a gimmick to give that sense of like having a fun time, really. Which it really was. It wasn't really a letdown. I mean, because oftentimes a lot of movies would put in music from like different eras, like the 80s and 70s, just to, I guess, resonate well with a potential audience. And I was afraid going into this movie because of all the trailers that we've seen and how Guardians of the Galaxy was positioned with all these classic tunes. I'm thinking like, I bet they're using the tunes just to resonate with a potential audience that can get into this film. Because let's be honest, Guardians of the Galaxy before this movie was not really a well-known household name, or neither was it a well-known group of superheroes. And now they're all over the place. They're really popular. People love Groot. People love Peter Quill. Moreover, it's because of the charms of that the actors got to put behind these characters, and that's what made them so interesting and so relatable and stuff. And the music is a plus too. And overall, the story is pretty solid. And as always, and this was during the time where like the MCU was struggling to have a decent antagonist of their movie, Ronan, to me, in this film, wasn't exactly a powerful antagonist. He wasn't exactly really interesting. And I don't know why Marvel kind of held back on developing more of a story about Ronan. You really didn't really care about him. And then when he died, it's not like you went like, oh, whatever. And I'm a spoiler if you haven't seen the movie, but like, it's whatever. I mean, he does end up coming back in a movie that does take place in the past, like in the 90s, which is Captain Marvel, if you haven't seen it. Aside from that, the movie overall is a great time. It does leave some questions unanswered, but definitely does get answered in its sequel, which is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which I hope to review some point in the near future with Anthony, perhaps. Anyways, overall, the movie is fantastic. I had a great time with it. I highly suggest you check it out if you haven't seen it already. Definitely go on Disney Plus. It's right there for you to watch. This is not a sponsorship for Disney Plus, but definitely recommend it if you're looking for a movie with a group of individuals who are really interesting, have really different, interesting backstories, and of course, a great soundtrack to listen to, because this movie is full of it. Anyways, that's it for my review, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. And Anthony, thank you so much for having me on your channel to review this movie. It definitely is a blast. And once again, guys, thank you all so much for watching. And Anthony, back to you.
A big thanks to Ronnie for being here in this video. Loved hearing your thoughts, man, and loved hearing a little bit of your journey with these characters and the movie, and just pretty much your overall thoughts on the film. It's always a lot of fun to do stuff here with you. The last time he was here on the channel was when we did a review for Sky High, the Disney superhero film. I was actually going to have him in my review a while back for Underdog, but things did not work out, so I said, hey, let's do Guardians of the Galaxy, and I do have that review for Underdog coming very soon. So a big thanks once again to Ronnie for being here in this video. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. And yeah, just to wrap up my thoughts on this movie, overall, I really love it. I think that James Gunn is a phenomenal director. And even with the second one not being as good as this one for me, and we'll get to that when I do the review for that one, I think that he's just a top-notch director that just has a great visual sense of how to tell this story. He really makes these characters lovable. It's a really funny and lighthearted film filled with tons of really great moments that you really do feel for all these characters as you're watching it. I think ultimately this is still going to always be one of, if not my favorite MCU film, detached from the Avengers just epicness, because I just think it's a great movie that really does stand on its own. It leaves you excited. You know it's going to have sequels. You know it's going to continue the story for these characters, and obviously we know that they would eventually come alongside the Avengers in later films. But as far as this film in and of itself, I remember seeing it multiple times in theaters. I watched it so many times, including in Spanish on Blu-ray, and I never get tired of seeing these characters and these performers playing these characters. I think it's one of the most refreshing films in the entire series if you're watching it from beginning to end, and I always love seeing people's reactions to this film if they're watching the entire series for the very first time. I got to do that with my fiance a couple years ago, where I sat her through all of the MCU films because she had not seen majority of them, and when we got to Guardians, she had a lot of fun with it. I think this movie just does a good job of introducing some very obscure comic book characters, and really for me proves that you can take pretty much any characters from the comic books, and as long as you have a good creative team and a good cast behind the making of the film, you can have yourself a really solid comic book adaptation, and this film is definitely one of those for me. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and stop praising this film and just give a couple of negatives, and really for me, it would really come mainly around the character of Ronan the Accuser. I think he's a great looking villain. I love the voice, I love the look, he's very cool, he's just a very cool, menacing villain, but overall, he's not really the focal point of the story, and as a villain he just kind of feels weak compared to some of the really stronger villains that we've seen in this film, most notably Thanos, who is in this movie, and in a lot of ways in the one scene that he's in is more menacing than Ronan is. But I still do like Ronan as a character in this film. I really enjoy the connection between him and Drax in this film in particular, but ultimately I really do enjoy the character of Ronan, and I enjoyed seeing him return for Captain Marvel, as that film is a prequel and we do see him get destroyed in this film. But ultimately, visually, this movie is beautiful. The soundtrack is phenomenal. The actual score is great as well. The costume design, the overall bringing this world to life is awesome. And what I like about this film as well is that it takes liberties from the comic books. In a lot of ways, it's very different from the Guardians of the Galaxy comic books, as Ronnie mentioned earlier. But they do a good job of adapting it in its own new and fresh way that does honor those comic books, but also does something new and fresh. It makes this version its own version. So a big thanks to you guys for watching as usual. Again, the link to Ronnie's channel is down below in the description box. His channel is called News to Astonish. He talks about all things movies and TV, but primarily comic book related stuff. So if you guys are into comic book movies, comic books in general, please go check out Ronnie. He's got tons of great content over there. His channel has been booming lately, and I could not be more happy for him. He's been working at this for a long time, and he definitely deserves the success. So please go give Ronnie some love and let him know I sent you. But for all of you guys, what can you do now? Well, please hit that like button. It helps the channel out. Please hit that subscribe button because it helps the channel out, and leave a comment down below letting me know what you guys think about this movie and this video, both because I want to know what you guys think and also because it helps the channel out. So a big thanks to you guys for watching as usual. Genuinely appreciate all the consistent support, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.